I'm going to talk about Geronimo today. Or I could talk, I'll talk about Geronimo, but then again, I might talk about all kinds of different things. But mainly I wanted to focus on Geronimo and the Apache warriors. I do jump around sometimes, even in thought. I mean, I might just put out thoughts that hang out there a while, and I may look like I'm reflecting while I'm getting downloads. That's how shamans and shaman warriors work. Love the topic of warriorship. Geronimo, the Apache warrior. His real name was Goyathle. Goyathle. One who yawns. That's what it means. One of my favorite people, a mentor, as were other great indigenous warriors, but I took to liking Geronimo from an early age, as did a lot of, I don't know if I want to say a lot of kids did. I remember using that name quite frequently as I was involved in my escapades, especially when it got exciting and it got daring. Sometimes you would yell, "Geronimo!" Meaning courage. It meant courage. It meant courage. Goyathle was his name. He got the name Geronimo later on. He was raised at the headwaters of the Gila River. He was born in the headwaters of the Gila River, which was on the border up there between eastern Arizona and western New Mexico. I think I got that right. There were also a group of mountains, White Mountains, and you've heard of the White Mountain Apache. Although he was not a White Mountain Apache, he was a Badonkahe. He was in that band. He was a fearsome opponent to those who made him a fierce opponent. I'll tell you the way he got his name Geronimo. At one time, before he got that name, he was making trips down to this little village in Mexico. He was making trips down there, and he was doing that for trading purposes, or basically, I guess you could say it was trading purposes in a little village down there, goods and stuff like that, exchanges. And he'd been doing this for a while with the other Apaches. It was a place, it was a sweet spot for them to go trade and do peaceful things for the most part. Although there was a animosity between the Mexican people, or the Mexican government, let's say, not the Mexican people so much, the government, and it spilled over to the Mexican people. There was an animosity between the Apaches and the Mexican people. They were brutal enemies at times. Although, having said that, a lot of Apaches interbred and they spoke Spanish. So it was, you could say, love-hate relationship in a way. As Geronimo was down in this little village trading, he camped out and basically had a kind of a base of operations, and then he would go into town. And when he camped out, he took his family with him, which was very common. He took his family with him, his wife and his mother and his 2 children. It was a fun thing, supposedly. It could be. Had been up to that point. But on this occasion, somebody in the Mexican army, some colonel, got wind of the fact that Geronimo was there and he was trying to make a name for himself. So he raided the camp while Geronimo had gone into town, left a few guards, I think, as they always do. But the larger body, including Geronimo, went into town to trade and maybe drink, hoop it up, whatever. As he was in town, as he had done many times before, feeling at ease and just doing his business, his trading, while that was going on, this particular colonel or whoever it was in the Mexican army who wanted to make a name for himself, as I said, went in and attacked this camp, this peaceful camp, where Geronimo's wife and 2 children and other people's wives and children were there, and they massacred him. They cut him up. They did bad things to him. They butchered him. So when Geronimo came back, there might have been a few of his guards that he left that realized that they had to, they couldn't fend off these invaders, so they might have just kind of camouflaged themselves like they did a lot of times back into the rocks or whatever. But they told Geronimo, or Goyathwe, at that time, they said, hey, Goyathwe, you know, they came in and they decimated us, we weren't ready for them, whatever. They had let their guard down. Geronimo flipped out. He was furious. He was insane with anger and revenge, which you can hardly blame him, seeing his family cut to bits. That would be a normal reaction. He wanted to seek revenge right then, but his fellow warriors told him, you know what, man, it would be better to regroup and come back later and take care of this, because we're not really up for it right now. We don't have enough people. Goyathwe was a supreme strategist, and he knew what they were saying was true, even though he was angry and revengeful and full of rage. He said, okay, we'll go back to New Mexico. And he did go back to New Mexico. And he chilled out a while, if you can call it that. He chilled out and had counsel with other chiefs. I won't say other chiefs, I'll say chiefs, because he wasn't really a chief. He was a war chieftain. And deservedly so, because he was a supreme warrior. So he was at one time the first lieutenant or the head man for Cochise. He was his war chieftain. So, as he was having counsel and trying to calm down, they continued on with their life a little bit, but they made a specific plan to go back. And this included the chief, Mengus Colorado, and Victorio. I do believe Victorio was in on that. There were so many great warriors. So they decided to go back down at one point and raid these particular people that were in that group of, in that platoon, or that group of people that had butchered his wife. They went down there to get back at him and to wreak havoc, basically. Only they did it organized, and they waited, and because they were the supreme strategist, the Apache warrior. I can't say that enough. They have my highest regard as far as warriorship and guerrilla fighting and knowing how to handle weapons. Why do you think the U.S. Army names their helicopters Apaches and stuff like that? Apache helicopters, which is a sacrilege in a way. They were supreme warriors. So they cruised down there, and they found the people that were responsible, or even if they weren't responsible, didn't matter at that point. They were going to seek revenge in any way they could. Might not have been all the exact same guys, but for the most part it probably was. And they went down there and they got into a confrontation immediately, planned out, surprised these people in the soldiers in the Mexican army, and they were on them. And hand-to-hand combat came about. And if you want to see something beautiful as far as warriorship, you would like to see Apaches fight with knives and lances. And yes, they were excellent shots. They didn't always have the best firearms, though. But they got them. They got the Winchester. They got the repeater. So they were in a hand-to-hand situation, and it looked like for a time there, I think that they were going to have to back off. And when Geronimo saw that, he even got more infuriated when he saw that they might have to back off. He goes, no, this isn't going to happen. And he ran around like a madman, like a screaming banshee, screaming loud, putting fear into the enemy, running from rock to saguaro cactus to creosote bush or whatever in that area, whatever plants were there, rocks, darting in and out. Probably had a knife in one hand and then another in his teeth, and probably a firearm too. And he was just running around and seeking out all of these places where these soldiers, Mexican soldiers, had taken cover. And they got fearful. They had never seen anything like it. They couldn't keep track of this guy. He was on them here and on them there and slitting their throats, taking them out. They got fearful. Now they knew how it felt to have fear. from fear of death, like Geronimo's wife and children and mother experienced. And as he was running around, slitting throats, kicking ass, and taking names, they got so fearful that they started screaming to one of their saints in the Catholic religion, and I think it was Saint Jerome. In fact, I know it was Saint Jerome. And Saint Jerome, save us, Saint Jerome, they were crying out in their language. And the fellow braves, the fellow warriors of Goyathle, Geronimo, who wasn't Geronimo until that time, and this is why. As they were crying out, Saint Jerome, it was interpreted into the language that they knew or that they used, possibly Spanish too. They realized that it was Geronimo. They started saying Geronimo. That's what those guys are yelling over there. Look at them. They're yelling Geronimo, Geronimo, when actually they were saying Jerome. And they got a kick out of it because they said, let's take that name and put it on the person that is causing their fear, which was Goyathle. And so just as kind of a funny thing to do, I guess, or just because they felt like they wanted to rib Geronimo or whatever, rib Goyathle, they said, hey, Geronimo, Geronimo. Hey, Geronimo. That's how he got his name. That's how he got his name. And they kicked ass and took all of those bad, muy malo Mexicans out. They taught him a lesson, a big lesson. And so that was the way he got his name. And you know, just to expound a little bit further on this story, let's talk about warriors, the Apache warrior in general. I mean, there were so many beautiful Apache warriors and warrior women, okay, like Lozen. Some people say Lozen, who had special powers and was a supreme woman warrior, and somebody I fell in love with from history. Wow. What a warrior woman. She could dress like a man. She had a way with horses. She was the horse whisperer of the Apaches. They sent her in on raids to get the horses out first, and she did it without a sound. She had supernatural powers, as did Goyathle and Geronimo, and a lot of those had the power. Ndagehogate. Ndagehogate. That's the Apache word for the power that they had. This power came from Usen. Usen was their god who they went to for that power, or who they asked if he would, or that God would give them that power. Now, I've talked about power in the past here in my past videos. I just talked about that, and I talked about the power of the shaman. And I talked about being a Kalika warrior, which is the warrior of Mother Earth, which was exactly what these people were. No doubt about it. They had tapped into that energy, and they used it. They were supreme trackers. Let me tell you how they trained warrior Apache kids, young men. One of the things that they put them through in order for them, they trained them in everything: tracking, survival, being one with the earth, being one with the planet, knowing it so well that you could disappear into it, as happened many times in the Dragoon Mountains. Many times did they disappear right into the mountains. This is true. This is fact. Anyway, one of the training rituals was for the young ones was to have the young boys put water in their mouth, just take as much water into their mouth as they could, but not swallow it, and run to the top of a mountain in heat that might have been up in the 100-degree, 105-degree range, and then make it all the way to the top and then all the way back down without swallowing that water that was in their mouth. Now, if you've ever been in Arizona or raised there like I have been, and I have climbed many mountains there to the top, Camelback Mountain, Southwest Mountains, hiked the Apache Trail, have done all that, so I know what it's like to be out in that climate in the arid zone in Arizona. And want water. And here you have it in your mouth and you can't take a swallow of it. Not till you get back down off the mountain, then you can take a swallow. That's how they trained their young ones to be survivalists, strong. The Apache warrior had legs that were like bands of steel. They made specific kinds of moccasins to traverse the terrain without getting thorns in their feet. They could run 80 miles in 110-degree heat in the arid zone or Arizona. They were tough as nails. How did they fight? Well, Lozin and Victorio and others, Dateste was a woman warrior who taught Goyan, who was another woman warrior, they were all a lineage of Apache women warriors. Lozin was the last in the lineage, or part of the lineage, I should say. These people were supreme warriors. They could camouflage themselves. They could melt into mountains. They could disappear in the middle of the desert. They buried themselves in the sand. They felt things. Lozin had the power. Indage Hogate. She had the power. She could stand on a butte or a ledge overlooking a expanse, not seeing a thing, but she could tell exactly where the enemy was by the feeling of her arms. She could tell where they were, how far they were, how long it would take them to get there. She was an invaluable resource to Geronimo and Vittorio, her brother. Goyathle Geronimo had uncanny powers as a shaman. He actually stopped the sun rising for a few minutes. These people were The supreme warriors, mentally, physically, spiritually, they were shamanistic warriors. That's why they lasted so long. They were the best knife fighters. They could throw knives and hit the mark long distances, take out people silently, crack shots, knew how to shoot better than anybody, perfect eyesight, could look out on an expanse and see whirls of dust of army guys chasing them in a platoon or something, and the Apache kid and others could look out there and tell you exactly how many people were in that swirl of dust, where they were going, what kind of horses they were riding. They didn't even need looking glasses. You don't think these people were tuned into the earth, tuned into Mother Earth, were true Kalika-type warriors, earth warriors? And these people knew how to use intent to get what they needed. They worked on all kinds of levels. There were all kinds of warriors, from age old to young. Nana was a warrior who was a chief, and he rode in the saddle into his 80s. And he had a broken foot. He was crippled. And then there was Katanye. And Katanye was another supreme warrior who was the husband of Goyan. And Goyan was a supreme warrior woman. One time she had an exploit because of her first husband, before Katanye, had been killed by, I believe it was a Comanche chieftain or something like that, in some kind of scuffle between tribes. And she went in there, she found out who did it, she crawled, slinked her way into camp, to the campfire, to the big campfire they had, and blended in with the rest of the tribe, and was a very seductive looking woman. And she seduced the man who killed her husband, went into his tent or campfire or whatever it is that night, and slit his throat from ear to ear. Then she took all of his sacred belongings and necklaces and everything off his body and brought it back to her tribe as an offering for the death of her husband. Goyan married to Katanye. And Goyan was friends with and influenced by Taoist. And Taoist was another woman warrior. This was like a big family of warriors, men and women. They didn't take shit. And they knew how to live off the land, and they were strong, strong people. And I have high admiration. They are my heroes, my mentors. Along with others in other tribes like Crazy Horse, or His Horse is Crazy. But that's another story that I don't want to get into right now. And I will get into it, though. Might do a series on warriorship. And I'm not going to say too much about what we see today in that regards, because I don't want to even compare it in any way, shape, or form as to anybody that would call themselves a warrior or anybody that, let's say, is interested in overthrowing tyranny and overthrowing and becoming a true earth warrior instead of the complete nonsense Mickey Mouse stuff you hear out there now. That's why I'm doing this video. One of the reasons is to correlate what we see now with people having courage or standing up or having a certain intent to having a certain intent, a certain consciousness, a certain extrasensory, supernatural perception. I like to share this stuff, and I'll be sharing more, and so I don't want to go on too long here. But I thought you would enjoy some of my recollections and stories about the Apache warrior and those that I spoke of in particular. I used to have a group called Campfire Council, and it was based on sitting around a campfire like they did many, many times, the warriors, Lozin and Geronimo and Victorio and Nana, all of them sitting around a campfire, if you can imagine it, and talking tactics, seeking counsel from each other as to what was to come next, knowing exactly what their intent was with the enemy, and just having fun, drinking a little Tizwin, which was their form of beer, made from corn. Very good stuff. Give you a little kick there. Take the edge off. Oh yeah, they love their Tizwin. And they had little man-to-man fights amongst themselves, and they got into all kinds of little games and exercises, let's say, for combat practices. Did things like practicing their camouflage techniques, and the best guerrilla fighters there were, or at least ranked up at the very best in the history of man. I love talking about the indigenous ways. Get so sick of talking about, tired of talking about what's going on around me, because it's just absolutely, in the perspective of the real warrior, I think you get my drift. I'm going to leave it there today, and I hope you enjoyed that talk. And by the way, you can share this by the share button up there. I'm not real big on pumping this because I wouldn't want to become an instant celebrity or something overnight, which could happen anytime, and it's kind of scary, so don't know if I'd even want that. I wouldn't want that, actually. I prefer to have a small group of people that appreciates what I'm saying, as opposed to thousands that are a bunch of knuckleheads. But anyway, a little bit more exposure would be okay. So if you want to use that share button and do all the mechanical bullshit you got to do to indicate that you appreciate my words and get some of my thoughts out there. I think mankind needs some of this stuff right now. And also, I want to thank the person or persons who purchased my book, 2 of my books actually, and gave me a donation, and I didn't even really mention it that much. I appreciate that. You know, the indigenous part of me realizes that medicine men or shamans or people that pass on knowledge do get offerings. It's okay. In the old days, it would be something like tobacco, still even now. Just something, some offering, some sacred herb, whatever. But you can't do that obviously here, so you know, I don't mind about donations. spiritofcrazyhorse.com is where you do that, and it's in the links below. I'm on the Instagram too. I'm not real big on being all over the social media, although at one time, in order to promote my book, I was on, I had 5 Facebook pages of all different kinds. 1 for each book and 1 for each CD I had. Native American flute I play. I'll have to do that for you sometime. I'm going to leave it there. Wrapping it up now. Adios.